Atheist YouTuber Prophet Azad recently put up a video responding to the fine-tuning argument by giving 6 different objections, and today we will be covering his objections and responding to him. So, Travis, we're here together today because we're going to be responding to 6 problems with the fine-tuning argument, which is a video that Prophet of Zod put out. And I asked you to do this just because you and I put up our fine-tuning argument series just a few months ago.
Right.
And I've had a lot of the people that listen to the channel ask me to respond to this, so here we are.
Yeah.
Why don't you just introduce yourself before we get into things?
Yeah, sounds good. So I do study atmospheric science. Ministry-wise, I'm part of the Reasons to Believe team headed up by Hugh Ross. I'm in their apologetics community. So they have like an apologetics community, the scholar community, and then the actual staff. So, I love doing that for Reasons to Believe and kind of showcasing a lot of their work, which incidentally, our fine-tuning argument was based off of. So, yeah, I really love doing that. And, just happy to be here. In my spare free time, I also really love philosophy of religion and philosophy of science and just investigating these very deep, interesting questions.
Well, I'm glad to have you back on, man. It's always a pleasure. And I think our fine-tuning argument series is probably like one of my most favorite series we've done on this channel so far. So
yeah.
Again, for the audience, the video we're responding to today is from Prophet Azad. And here it is. So he gives 6 objections to the argument. His video will be posted in the description below. So I do want to say this. It seems like he's not responding to anybody's fine-tuning argument in specific. It seems like he's just kind of shooting at the generic fine-tuning argument you'll see in like the pop level sphere. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. A lot of his objections don't even apply to what's in the academic literature. So, you think of people like Robin Collins and so forth. The argument, like, especially I think the one about the multiverse doesn't even apply to most fine-tuning arguments I know of in the academic literature. This is, like you said, for more of a popular level fine-tuning argument, I guess. And so we have popular level objections, but that's cool.
I can see how this might how these objections might apply to like a deductive approach or even maybe just like a fine-tuning implies fine-tuner type argument. And so I just think that this will be helpful for people because sometimes it can be tricky kind of seeing some of the pop level objections in light of some of the more like serious argumentation that's up there. So his first objection is that most of the universe is inhospitable to human life and would instantly kill us. So I was just going to play this clip a little bit so people can hear him, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Okay.
Number 1.
Can you hear this?
Most of the universe is inhospitable to human life and would instantly kill us. This one's probably familiar to most of you, and if not, you should check out the great video Dark Matter 2525 did about this. In short, it's kind of weird to think the universe is a place God fine-tuned for life when, if it were designed, it was mostly designed to kill us. It's basically made up of a vacuum we would almost immediately die in, dotted with stars that would vaporize us and planets that are almost all as deadly as space. The tiny speck of a planet we can survive on is mostly inhospitable if not deadly, and we've had to claw our way to survive in the temperate climates our species is adapted to. So even the best spots on this one speck of cosmic dust would as soon kill us as help us thrive. But because it
So I think he brings up like an interesting point, right? Like, if the universe is fine-tuned for the existence of life, and I'm saying life very generically here because that's what he's targeting.
Sure.
He does bring up an interesting point. Like, well, under this hypothesis of theism, like you wouldn't expect there to be so many areas of the universe that's apparently fine-tuned for life to be inhospitable to life. Now, I don't know how that affects our specific argument, but I guess what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. So there's some axiological assumptions that are going on here. One assumption is that God would prefer that life be everywhere in the cosmos, and as we've stated in our fine-tuning argument, the kind of teleological fine-tuning argument that we are going with, and that I would be comfortable endorsing, is one for the existence of embodied moral agents to make morally significant decisions in a moral theater. Even more deeper than that is kind of like what Trent Doherty refers to as a saint fostering environment, where it's a locale, so to speak, a location where the highest amount of virtues can be built. So there's that consideration. And actually, I'm reading this book by Hugh Ross, Designed to the Core, and there's something he says that I really like, and he kind of opens it up that one person sees a razor sharp blade as a deadly weapon, the other as a life-saving scalpel. The motive of the one who holds the blade makes all the difference. So what if what appears to be deadly and dangerous is actually what makes life, especially human life and its flourishing, possible? And he goes on to say, and our fine-tuning specifically, shows how an abundance of evidence now indicates that the cosmos, and with its mass, size, age, inflation, elements, and ratio of elemental abundances, must be exactly structured as they are in order for us to be here. And so it kind of, I would critique that argument as having the wrong point of reference, because we need these processes that he's calling devastating for life, like, the existence of like Mars and black holes and all this. It's precisely tuned for the development of life to be here and to survive and thrive. It's what it does is it places limitations on
humans.
Right. Yeah. We're here under these current laws of physics, and, we have this space, so to speak. But yeah, so it's precise for
the type of world that you would expect given theism.
Yeah.
Right?
Sorry, my computer just. Yeah. Sorry about that. But yeah, so these processes that he's saying are devastating. What's interesting is they have to be exactly as they are in order for us to survive and thrive. And so it's actually part of the fine tuning. And like Hugh Ross brilliantly laid out, what makes a difference on whether it's a dangerous blade or a life-saving scalpel is the motive of who has the blade. And so and the motive here is, for the existence and development of embodied moral agents. And so,
right. And so that's why. So the reason I brought up his objection and tried to like steelman it a little bit here is because a lot of fine-tuning, like proponents of the fine-tuning argument within the popular sphere, they're just going to say the word life and that's it. But given theism, right, like we're expecting a world that is saint fostering for embodied moral agents. So part of what you would expect from fine-tuning in that type of a world is a world where there are going to be dangers. There are going to be different things that allow for suffering and evil and all this other stuff. So
and that also reminds me of what Swinburne has to say, that it's part of our epistemic knowledge and the way we form. We need these regular laws and processes occurring in regular ways in order to learn about the world and to know the consequence and effects of moral choices. For example, you think of in moral disasters, there are great opportunities to develop sainthood and to do great things. And there's also the moral ability to do very terrible things. What's interesting about disasters is they really tend to bring our moral choices to the surface. So you think of like what happened with Hurricane Katrina and so forth. So it's part of what we would expect in a saint fostering environment. And it just so happens, like I was mentioning, to be tuned for our existence in the first place. So the objection doesn't work.
Yeah, I pretty much totally agree with you there, Travis. And here's a quote from Ignatius of Loyola. And I think this kind of, the reason I'm going to bring this up is because I think it kind of draws onto what we should expect on Christian theism and what historically Christians even, and I'm a Christian, I'm going to defend Christian theism here in specific. What Christian theism kind of gives us as an expectation when it comes to suffering in the world and the different teleological things of the world. And Ignatius says, if God gives you an abundant harvest of trials, it is a sign of a great holiness which he desires you to attain. Do you want to become a great saint? Ask God to send you many sufferings. The flame of divine love never rises higher than when fed with the wood of the cross, which the infinite charity of the Savior uses to finish his sacrifice. All the pleasures of the world are nothing compared with the sweetness found in the gall and vinegar offered to Jesus Christ. That is, hard and painful things endured for Jesus Christ and with Jesus Christ. And do you get why I'm bringing that up? Like,
yeah, I think, you know, first of all, it's quite powerful, and you know, it's very encouraging. And so this would kind of go back, you know, because I would argue that an entailment of general theism is a canonical theism, like Christianity. And I believe Doherty has an argument that the probability of Christian theism given general theism is close to 1. And so there's that, and you know, it's part of you know, this saint fostering environment, like I was saying, you know, with you know, these natural disasters and processes that can be harmful. So you think about how, like, something like Hurricane Katrina brought these relevant moral decisions really to the surface, because you see, you saw great good and great you know, evil being done, you know, with these moral choices that happen. And you'll see that in many of these natural disasters. They tend to bring our moral choices to the surface.
Yeah, any a lot of suffering in general. I'm not going to sit here and tell you all the time this is what happens, but time and time again, I've talked to people and I've seen stories of people who've endured both suffering on a natural disaster scale, which is what's relevant to what Prophet Azad is saying here today, but even from like human-induced suffering. And the typical reoccurring theme here is, I would not choose to go through it again, but I'm also thankful that it happened to me because it built my identity. And I can, at least I can speak to that on my own, from my own experience as well. And so this true. Is not to go into a whole problem of evil thing here. This objection doesn't really pose much of an issue to Christian theism. In our formulation of the fine-tuning arc. Do you have any other like final thoughts before we move forward?
No, I would just say that, you know, it's, as we've mentioned, the you know, scientifically, these processes have to be exactly as they are for us to survive and thrive in this type of environment. We've showed why God would want us in this type of environment, and so I think it explains it very well.
Yeah, and we should add in the size of the universe, the scope of the universe. And all that stuff is part of our fine-tuning data.
Yeah, and so I didn't know if we wanted to bring that up now or in one of the later objections, but yes. So under theism, you know, these processes, and that's another thing with these natural disasters, is actually they help foster an environment where embodied moral agents can make morally significant decisions in a moral theater. But that's just one reason God creates. So, you know, God as absolute perfection with purely positive qualities, he's going to lack arbitrary limits. And so he's going to be pure actuality, pure value, pure goodness. So these, you know, perfection is a value, and it's the highest form, the highest type of value. And so we know God from his attributes of what he would likely do, because there's, you know, like Dionysius would say that there's what's known as the diffusion principle, that goodness is diffusive of itself and of being. And so God, as maximal goodness and maximal value, has reason to instantiate good and valuable states of affairs. And so he has that motivation to create valuable states of affairs. And so the way we define value under theism are in the categories of moral, aesthetic, and alethic values. So, you know, it's not, God doesn't just create and fine tune for the existence of embodied moral agents in a moral theater or just for the animals. He does it so that we can grow in knowledge. And there's an aesthetic beauty. Like, you know, a beautifully ordered cosmos unfolding is valuable. Even if God is the only one there to observe it, it's valuable. And interestingly,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, you know, interestingly, with the James Webb telescope pictures, you know, it's really highlighted that aesthetic beauty of how the cosmos unfolded.
I think a good analogy here when it comes to like our aesthetic values is like, let's think about this. Like, space is beautiful, but it's also terrifying.
Sure.
But so is the ocean. Like, I don't know if you've ever been on a cruise ship, but think about it. Like, I've seen some huge waves, and I like the ocean's beautiful, but then I also think it's beautifully dangerous. Like,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Like,
that's a
it's
great
almost
point.
like
Yeah,
it's almost like a beauty that like demands a respect, and I think
Mhm.
that's actually some sort of like value that's added into the world as well.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
so
interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
so all right, let's get back to it. There we go. Okay. His next objection: it considers the odds of producing our life in particular instead of any possible kind of life an all-powerful God could have created. So we'll just listen to him for a little bit.
2, it considers the odds of producing our life in particular instead of any possible kind of life an all-powerful God could have created. Let's forget that 99.99999% of the universe is a virtual death trap for humans, and instead just stand amazed that the atmosphere, water supply, temperatures, and available food on Earth are all just perfectly set up to ensure our survival. Even then, we'd have to ask ourselves, what's really so special or necessary about this arrangement? Sure, it supports our specific form of life, but what about other possible forms of life? Instead of fine-tuning Earth, could God not have created life that would have thrived on Venus instead? If he had, what would they have thought about themselves and their place in the universe? It's likely they would have marveled at how their planet's high-pressure carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere, its clouds of sulfur, its greenhouse-produced 400 degrees Celsius temperatures were all fine-tuned to support them. Maybe they, as humans do, would have seen themselves as the only possible form of life, thus concluding Venus had to have been fine-tuned to make life possible.
Uh,
Okay.
what struck me as so interesting about that video is he concedes the local fine tuning. He admits that these conditions are perfectly set up for our existence, and so now his objection is moved to, well, what's so special about life on Earth?
Right. So the one thing I do want to point out is the language that's really important in the very beginning of what he said, which was perfectly fine tuned for our life. And again, we're not, the argument, at least on our end, and what you'd see in the academic side, is it's not perfectly fine-tuned just for life simplicity.
Right.
It is fine-tuned for saint fostering embodied, like it's a saint fostering world, fine-tuned for embodied moral agents to operate within a moral theater and make morally significant decisions.
Right, exactly. And so, under theism, the afterlife is an entailment that we can trace all the way down from the initial hypothesis of absolute perfection. You're going to tease it out, and the afterlife is an entailment. And so this environment begins the fostering of saints that even the animals, in my theology, will get to participate in. And so their evils and sufferings will likewise be defeated in I want to say probably a martyrdom type status, but that's open for debate. But yeah.
So what do you like? He pretty much concedes the fine tuning of the Earth.
That struck me as very interesting.
The whole God could have fine tuned life to exist on Mars point. What do you make of that?
Right. Oh, okay. So, and I think this is kind of good. The things we said earlier, because it kind of laid the landscape of where we're going to be coming from. And so, as far as life on Earth, so it's like we've said, it's a certain location for embodied moral agents to make morally relevant decisions, to foster into sainthood, right? And there's also a reason that God would want humans to have physical bodies, which I'll get into later. But as far as why there's not life on Earth and everything, or life on other planets, is just going to get into why God creates and tunes the way He does, is to instantiate valuable states of affairs. And so we would want to epistemically tease out the value of why there's life on Earth. And as far as why there's not life on Mars, I don't even know how to make sense of an objection like that.
Right. So for anybody listening, if you want, because we're not going to go into full detail here, but if you want a good argument for why embodied moral agents need to be embodied, why humans are what God would want to make in specific, This is where I'm going to like point you to Richard Swinburne's book, The Existence of God.
Okay.
Page 120, 122, I think it is. Sorry, 123.
I'll go ahead and
okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was actually going to do it for the 6. His objection.
We can save it if you already have it planned.
Well, no, I'll go and get into it now since you kind of opened it up. As far as why would humans need bodies? Why would we need to be on Earth? As far as why there's not life there, or there, I don't see that as any kind of objection, and or I don't even see any relevance to it. But as far as why there's life,
there's one thing I'm just gonna say is so under this hypothesis, this alternative universe where it's actually Mars that's fine-tuned for.
Sure.
Hold on, let me pull up this thing again here. These demigorgon type things, whatever these are, right? Like,
right.
I don't really know how to make sense of this because on one end, like, I think if you're going to pose this alternative universe type objection, I think you need to propose a plausible model of how the fine-tuning would work in order to give rise to these things that are embodied moral agents,
and why it would be more valuable than
right.
the current state of affairs.
But like just looking at this picture, right? Like and I don't know if this is what he's going with, but I'm just trying to steelman it, okay?
Yeah, I'm trying
and treat it with respect.
Yeah, I'm trying to be charitable to the. This isn't a. I don't know how to even make sense of a lot of these, but I'm trying to be charitable.
Yeah. So let's just like looking at the picture. This seems like a world that I think Trent Doherty poses. I think it's like 6 types of universes, right? Where one is just like horrible, like it's just bad stuff. Then that's all. There's no good that actually happens, right? It's fight for survival or lose, and that is it. There's no exchange of moral goods or anything like that.
Right.
And then on the way end, everything's perfect. You fall off a cliff and the laws of nature get suspended and the rock turns into fluffy snow or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I would argue that we're like in one of those middle type universes that it argues for, saint fostering worlds and all this other stuff.
Right.
This world that he's proposing here looks like it's on the low end of the spectrum. And what I'm saying is this looks like a monster that's just trying to fight for survival, and that's it. The red skies, the dark landscape, and all this other stuff, right? Like, it seems like it seems like it's like one of those type universes that you wouldn't expect on theism. And so, is it possible? Like, is it within God's powers to make a universe where this is the fine-tuned world? I'm not saying it's logically impossible, but it's not what we would predict off of the hypothesis.
Right.
And so, like, I guess that's my attempt of like trying to take that alternative thing, like.
Yeah. So that kind of subways into a good point that I was going to bring up as to why we have life here, embodied moral agents here on planet Earth. Is I'd like to start with reading, quoting from what Swinburne says in The Existence of God, chapter 6. It's going to be the explanatory power of theism, and he says, "Quote." I defend humanly free agents as inanimate beings with moral awareness and limited freedom, power, and knowledge. They are persons of a limited kind. I claimed also that God would be unlikely to instantiate the kind of goodness that they possess in a minimum degree. If he makes humanly free agents, he will give them significant freedom, power, and knowledge. If their limited freedom is to be greatly valuable, it will be a freedom to choose between good and evil in the exercise of power to make significant decisions to themselves, each other, and the physical world, and to make great differences in that world, including the power to increase their powers and freedom of choice. They need to be able to cause in themselves and others pleasant and unpleasant sensations, to investigate the world and acquire knowledge. And for that, we need human moral agents with bodies. And then there's also, when it comes to animals, like why would he fine-tune animals, is that they currently acquire knowledge and learn about the world and their, through their environment. That's how they gain epistemic knowledge, and they'll kind of default back to Trent Doherty's saint fostering theodicy, so to speak, that they grow in knowledge and are eventually given a moral significance in the eschaton. And so and then even like other lower animals too also, while they don't acquire knowledge about the world and make these type of decisions, they have pleasures and pain. They have sensations that we could probably tease out a value from that as well. But going off what Swinburne says, there's a significant motivation God would have to create us on a planet like Earth. So.
Yeah, and that starts on page 123 of
right.
Swinburne's book.
Yeah.
So please, read that if you want a more in-depth analysis of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So in other words, just for a final closing thought, and this will kind of go back to the first objection too, is that you see a fine tuning of our space and freedom. So we, in order for us to have freedom and acquire knowledge, we need a certain spatial regulations. It can't be like too much, or it can't be, too little, so that we don't learn anything. So there's a fine tuning even to, to that very fact right there of why we need to be embodied.
Yep. All right. Objection 3. It assumes the universe was made to help life survive and not that life adapted to survive in the universe. So let's see what he has to say.
It assumes the universe was made to help life survive and not that life adapted to survive in the universe. On any planet, there are one of two options. Either some form of proto-life develops or it doesn't. From there, the proto-life may develop into basic organisms or it may be destroyed. If successfully reproducing life develops, then each generation that follows may produce offspring suited to that environment, or it might not. If this continues to happen generation after generation, life may become cognizant of its place in the universe and develop the tools to study conditions on other planets. Now, the odds of this all happening generation after generation are astronomically slim. But here's the trick. It could not happen over and over and over, and nobody would notice it didn't happen because, nobody was there to notice the failure. This means that every time conscious life does arise, it will do so against overwhelming odds and end up in an environment that adequately supports it, meaning that natural circumstances are almost always going to produce the illusion that the universe was amazingly and elaborately designed for the survival of whoever's observing it. The fine-tuning argument overlooks this perfectly valid, parsimonious explanation, and instead just posits that a supernatural being we can't observe created the universe using unknown mechanisms and fine-tuned it to allow us to barely scrape by on one planet and die everywhere else.
So, I think the first thing I'm going to say there is, again, pop level, maybe. I'm not actually too familiar with what pop level fine-tuning arguments say. I would say our argument and most of the arguments in academia are actually taking this into account, because there's actually fine-tuned laws that allow for the life to adapt to the universe, right? So
and so it's kind of, I would also object to him saying that that's more parsimonious. I don't, that's a very improbable hypothesis, because there's basically an ordering, so to speak. So you need, and in fact, our fine-tuning argument highlights this very well, I think, which we got from Reasons to Believe Hugh Ross and Richard Swinburne. It's that, you have these conditions for a life-permitting universe, right? That's one that will, universe that will even permit life at all, including the kind of life he hypothesized, right? Mm-hmm. So you need certain conditions for that. But that's not the end all be all of where the fine tuning goes, because it keeps growing to our supercluster of galaxies, to the local group, to our Milky Way galaxy, to our solar system. And so there's this stacking of fine tuning data that we need, and that all of this accumulated data ends in one point. So to say that there's another point where it could just survive and thrive, I don't even see that as being coherent. It kind of reminds me of like the puddle objection in a way.
Yeah,
that life it kind of just assumes that life could just adapt anywhere, and no, like I was mentioning, we need this layering of conditions for us to be here.
I made a video on this specifically because this is a really common mistake you see when it comes to assessing the parsimony of theories, especially when it comes to theism versus naturalism.
Right.
Where's my... Okay, so this video, Occam's Razor and God's Existence. I'm not going to play the video. But I think people should watch this if they want to understand what we're really saying here. Because it's not more parsimonious to say what he just explained as a theory, because we're both like you and I are both saying, yeah, that's what happened. But what explains that process? The fine-tuned laws that allowed it to happen in the first place.
Right. Exactly.
And then at fundamental reality, the naturalist is going to have to probably say those are brute facts, which means they're counting up an incountable amount of brute facts just with fine-tuned constants and laws. But the theist is just postulating one thing that takes into account those things. So the fundamental theories themselves are compared, not the end states of affairs of those theories, right? So on theism, we're just postulating one thing with one or two properties depending on your model of God. And from there, we get our entailments or our predictions.
Right.
And so...
Yeah, and so... you know, I'm in Rasmussen's camp when it comes to this, and it's going to have both. It's going to have both kinds of simplicity. It's going to come out ahead on both the number of things you posit and the properties of the thing you posit. Yep. So it has both. You know, so I would just hypothesize absolute perfection. So that's one thing. And from absolute prediction, it would flow, these certain predictions would flow as entailments. And then there's also consequences of the theory. And then there's observations we look at and we figure out. So there's an abductive sense in which you would look at this observation and say, yeah, absolute perfection would best explain that. It would be a more expected matter, of course. There's also ways of probabilistically looking at, you know, which of the two hypotheses would account for it in that sense. And so naturalism is going to have to posit more initial starting things, like you have a quantum field that, you know, has arbitrary limits.
Yep.
And so
those limits don't have explanation. So those limits are all brute.
Right. And so without going too much into the theoretical virtues, if you have to tack on extra content to explain your theory when certain issues arise, like why does it produce these galaxies in this way? Why do protons and neutrons stick together in an atomic nuclei just like this and not like that? The explanations are going to be arbitrary, whereas a foundation that's you know, pure actuality and has no limits, you know, we can tease out the predictions, and that's what we have in the world. And so theism comes out ahead in both areas of simplicity there.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, we don't assume that the universe was made to help life survive and not that life adapted. We assume that it was actually made so life could survive and adapt. So again, maybe on the pop level, this is a mistake that a lot of people make, but so next one. It assumes that the constants and other attributes of the universe that make life possible were random.
This is where fine-tuning gets most technical. Apologists often paint a picture of the universe having settings, such as gravity and the strong nuclear force, that had to have been set up as with a bunch of dials to make the universe fit for life. If any of these dials had been nudged the tiniest bit in the wrong direction, then gravity would have been too weak or too strong, atoms would collapse, or any number of other things could go wrong and make the universe a chaotic place where life couldn't survive. So surely there had to have been someone turning these dials, right? Because they couldn't have set themselves at random. Well, first off, we simply don't know that. We know literally nothing about what made the universe the way it is, or even if anything did make it what it is in any way that's at all intuitive to us. So there's simply no reason for us to assume any of these forces could have been any different. There's no reason for us to assume there are infinite possibilities for the strength of gravity, and the choices of that either fell on just the right one by random or was set there by a designer.
All right. So I think there's a lot of mistakes that were made in this one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to even know where to start. Okay, so these processes aren't necessary. One example is that is the matter-antimatter asymmetry. So, you know, in the early moments of the universe, you have the likely the fundamental force that breaks into the four fundamental forces, and then matter and antimatter were created in almost equivalent amounts. For every billion pair of quarks, there were and anti-quarks, there was an extra quirk, And it's that one extra quirk that prevented the universe from devolving into radiation, because when matter and antimatter collide, they explode into a photon, right? And so you would think there should have been a complete symmetry. So there didn't have to be a 1 in a billion asymmetry. It's not like a necessary that happens. So it's not like he seems to be saying that these constants are the way they are, as they're just metaphysically necessary. They have to be like this. And so that's one area where I think he's going wrong.
Right.
Another area is that we're looking at, it's not that somebody's necessarily tuning these dials. We're looking at, there's an observation we have of precision, and we don't even have to use the words fine tuner, tuning dials, or anything of that sort. There's precision, in physics. In fact, all fields of science, astrophysics, biology, chemistry, anything you can think of, there's precision that's met, and it has all this precision comes together for a unified result. And so we're trying to offer what is the best explanation of this phenomena. It's a phenomena in need of explanation. And so then we make our hypothesis in theism, especially in our fine-tuning argument. We're saying theism would best explain this phenomenon.
Yeah. And so it sounds like he's pushing like on the epistemic claim that we can know the range of possible values of the constants or something like that,
right?
Anything like that. And so what would you say to that?
Well, that's part of why I mentioned the matter-antimatter asymmetry problem, and it's also false. We know very well that these processes can be different, and even if you wanted to grant that, with the laws and variables of the boundary conditions of the cosmos, that they couldn't have been any different. Well, you also have the fine-tuning that grows into our supercluster of galaxies that has these specially met conditions. The Milky Way, the local group, the Milky Way, solar system, the planet, the moon, the interaction, and all these various processes did not have to be the way they are. So even if you were to say that the laws and variables of the boundary conditions couldn't have been any different, what follows after that certainly could have been different and didn't have to unfold the way it did. And again, these it's not an objection that you'll really find in the academic literature, but that's just my thoughts on it.
Just like determining the range, like how we do it and how we know.
Oh, right, yeah, you'll find this in Luke Barnes' work as well. That's why I was saying it's false. We know they could have been different, and we know what would result if they had been different.
Right.
And then, like I said, even if that were true, with the laws and variables of the boundary conditions, like the four fundamental forces, the ratio of electron to proton mass, and these different, the entropy and these different aspects. Even if what he's saying was true, that still wouldn't explain how it keeps growing to like the supercluster of galaxies and on downward. We know very well that they could have been different, and we know what would have occurred had they been different. That's the fine tuning, and so it's not an assumption. It's we actually know this.
Right. This is kind of modal epistemology basics here. So, like, if we want to say that the constants could have been necessary, then there's a very easy way of showing that they could have been necessary, and that's by showing some sort of like broad logical or metaphysical contradiction or logical contradiction, and them being different. But there is no contradiction that we can find, so it's both logically and metaphysically possible that they could have been different. That's right. So
it's not a sufficient objection.
Okay, it dismisses alternatives such as the multiverse hypothesis as having no evidence. And so I think I'll let him talk, and then I think you're going to have a fun time with this one.
Sure.
Because I love what you have to say about the multiverse. We covered this objection in our objections stream on the fine-tuning argument. So if anybody wants to see that, go look at that.
5. It dismisses alternatives such as the multiverse hypothesis as having no evidence. Now, I'm personally not much into things like multiverses. They're extremely hypothetical, and any indication that one exists is so technical it's way over my head. So for the sake of discussion, let's just say there's no reason whatsoever to take the idea of a multiverse seriously, and that it's just absolutely pointless. Fine. But is this concession any kind of victory for the Christian fine-tuning argument? I'd say no. And the common apologetic reaction of laughing at the multiverse hypothesis as a far-fetched science fiction-y sounding idea that has no evidence is kind of weird. These same apologists contend that an all-powerful bodiless spirit being spoke the universe into existence. And that's, to put it mildly, not better. But the trick is that God's already parked in...
So,
okay.
Yeah. So I'll start here, and I'm just going to say this. I think he misunderstands how evidence is conceived, right? Like, according to the law of likelihood, evidence, any data is evidence for any hypothesis, so long as it's expected on that hypothesis more than any of its competing hypotheses, right? So, like, probability of D given H1 is greater than the probability of D given H2. Therefore, it's probability for H1, right? So we should just lay that as the foundation. Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, so I have a lot to say here. The first is he's actually I'll get into the science first. He's mistaken that there's no evidence for the multiverse, and so by way of background, I won't get too technical, but just sort of a bullet point of how we got to where we are in regards to the multiverses. So you have Einstein's theory of special relativity, then general relativity, which updates our background knowledge of Newtonian physics, right? So you think of his three laws and the law of gravitation. And so as we, with the expansion rate, that's Edwin Hubble in 29, discovers the redshift that the galaxies are moving apart, which means the universe is expanding. And so we start getting into the Hawking-Penrose theorem, and so forth in like 1970. And so there becomes this flatness problem when we discover the radiation and, the microwave background radiation, that it seems to be uniform in nature, and this would be regions that have never even come in contact with each other. So we have this problem of explaining the uniformity in the cosmic microwave background, right? And so in, I believe, 81, you have Alan Guth, who postulates cosmic inflation, which is a very brief hyperexpansion in the very early moments of the cosmos. So this happens, right at, the initiation of the Big Bang, and lasts only until about 10 to the minus 43 seconds. So it's a very brief hyperexpansion rate. And so with this brief hyperexpansion rate, you are going to get some type of multiverse. Now, it could just simply be that the universe is larger than we'd be capable of measuring. Do we ever get to measuring the boundary conditions of the cosmos? Or it could be that this, with this cosmic foam of inflation, you get universes it's going to start bubbling up universes. And there's even what's known as eternal inflation, that this will go on, unending. And while it would have a beginning, it would just continue on, and so forth. And so then there's also the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. So that's, you think of the double slit experiment. And so with the double slit experiment, most people are familiar with the interpretation that, you have the wave where the electron, it collapses upon observation, right? Well, there's the many worlds interpretation that would say that every point along the way is actualized too, that they're sort of bundled together, and what collapses is just a decoherence of that. And so, if we look at the universal wave function, it could be that anything conceivable is actually bundled together, and that our particular universe is just sort of a decoherence of that bundle. And so then, we get into quantum gravity. So it would be speculation as to what type of multiverse we would be in, but given inflation, you will get some type of multiverse. And so it's not the case that, and you think about Robin Collins' work and Rodney Holder and so forth, and Luke Barnes, they take the multiverse into consideration. What we're simply saying is that it doesn't explain, it's not sufficient to explain the design and fine tuning that we have in our universe. And so that's the first mistake I kind of wanted to go over. And then I also like what Rodney Holder, I think, brings up a great point in regards to what's known as the observation selection effect. So, for example, we find if we're in a multiverse of an infinite or near infinite multiverse, that is, we would find ourselves in this cosmos due to an observation selection effect. Like we're obviously in the one because we're observing it. But what Rodney Holder has noticed is that there's more fine tuning than that is needed for us to just be observers. So if there is an infinite or near infinite set of multiverses, and we, through selection effect are in the one that is life permitting, that would be evidence for design because it's more design than is just necessary for observers. So that additional fine tuning would support a design hypothesis. And moreover, I can think of an infinite set of universes that are not life permitting. There can be an infinite set of universes that have only hydrogen atoms. And so, what we're looking at is, like I said, this precision of the data and what best explains it. And so I actually think we are in a multiverse, and it's not sufficient to explain the fine-tuning data. So I know I've said a lot. I'll let you.
No. I was planning on letting you just take this one away because you do a great job of covering this one.
Yeah, and I guess the final consideration is, like I said, the observation selection effect would actually favor design because there's more design than is necessary to just observe. There's the fact that you could have so you look at this process that brings about these universes, and you have to ask, why is it here? Why does it produce universes when it could just produce? And now that it does produce universes, why does it have a universe that's life permitting? Like I said, I can think of an infinite set of lifeless universes. So why is, and so if that's the case, it would actually be fine tuned itself to bring about a life generating universe, and the observation selection effect would favor design. And so, I think theism comes out ahead on that. And so, basically, a simple way of looking at multiverse hypothesis 2 in regards to design is like what Josh Rasmussen says in regards to arbitrary limits. Like all of this data that I just mentioned, under naturalism is going to be arbitrary, but under theism, it's going to be expected. And I guess my final thoughts are that, how we were saying that, a beautifully or highly ordered cosmos unfolding has an aesthetic value to God. And so I think God may have some motivation to instantiate multiverse, because if creating one universe unfolding is a beautiful and good thing, then perhaps an infinite or near infinite set of universes unfolding are an even better thing. And so, it could be that God has motivation for aesthetic reasons to bring about other universes.
Well said. And we, like I said, we covered this in our Objections live stream, in our series of arguments, kind of giving our formulation of the fine-tuning argument. So if anybody wants to just kind of get a little bit more emphasis on different things on considering this, we talk about that in that video too. All right. Last objection. Here we go. It proposes that God went out of his way to design humans with specific weaknesses just so he could design the universe to accommodate them. We kind of covered this already, but
we did. This gets into the thing that it's humans need. And I was thinking about just bringing the what Swinburne says in regards to why humans need bodies. But I would just apply that here, that we need this physical environment, and then like Doherty says that. There's this fine tuning of virtue producing worlds. And so, theism would predict that we find ourselves in a saint fostering environment. And so, God
so predict the weaknesses.
Right. And then it says it proposes that God went out of his way to design humans with specific weaknesses just so he could design a universe to accommodate them. Well, God didn't just design the universe to accommodate us.
Yep.
He one reason is moral reasons that humans, and I would argue future animals, can grow into sainthood.
Yep.
And there's like there's the alethic value, like, it's one design argument will often say that, we're at the unique time in the cosmic unfolding history where we can observe and learn about the cosmos because we can observe the velocity of light and the expansion rate. And we're at the one unique time in cosmic history where that's possible. So there's this alethic value. And then there's, like I mentioned, the aesthetic value of God has motivation to bring about beautiful things. Like Swinburne would even say, if God creates a universe, he will create a beautiful universe.
Yep. So I'm just kind of let him talk a little bit. And then if there's anything that we should add in after we listen in for a little bit, we can do that.
Sure. Okay.
But I think we kind of covered this quite a bit. So
yeah.
Seriously, think about this. God's sitting there before the beginning of time. Literally nothing except him exists, and being all-powerful, he can create whatever he wants, however he wants. Naturally, being a well-adjusted being with a healthy sense of self-actualization, he decides he wants to create people to worship him. So what's he do? Well, first, he'd better create a universe for them to live in, right? And he'd darn well better fine-tune that universe so it's safe for them to live in. Right? Right? Well, actually, no. Because here's an interesting question. Safe for whom? For humans? Those don't exist yet. So why would God need to fine-tune the universe for them? Why make sure it included a planet with an oxygen atmosphere? So that it could provide food, water, a specific temperature range. How would it even enter his head to fret over these things? Before these could be necessary or even comprehensible things for him to worry about, he would have had to invent the very idea of needing oxygen, food, and water, then go out of his way to design his creation in such a way that they had these needs. So why not just not invent those needs? What in the not yet created world would possess him to be like, okay, I'm going to make needing...
So yeah, we already pretty much covered that.
Right, and I would just I would also fundamentally disagree with his model of God that he's working off of there about God doing a checking off a to-do list. Yeah, so God is absolute, and we did cover it. God is absolute perfection, and so we mentioned how maximum goodness will pursue maximum value. So God creates it for valuable states of affairs in the moral, aesthetic, and alethic domains. And as far as his knowledge of, figuring all this out, God is absolute perfection, has purely positive qualities, is pure actuality. So he would have maximum knowledge, ultimate unlimited knowledge.
Yeah, so, and again, I think in his defense, most of the argumentation you see out there is not going to be the academic side, the scholarly level things, right? That's the whole entire point of this channel, of trying to bridge the gap between that pop level stuff and the academic stuff, make it understandable, all that jazz.
And so I think there's a value, kind of tease out the value of where he's coming from. While I'm not familiar with him, I haven't seen his stuff prior to this. I think there is a value in question, because you think about, in philosophy, philosophy of religion, we ask, and philosophy of science, we ask these deep questions like, if there is a God, why does this happen? Why is there a fine-tuned universe? How do we make sense of our moral intuitions? What would best explain that? That's kind of the root of philosophy, is asking, simple but why questions to deep and meaningful things. And so that's good. I would just want to encourage him to go deeper into philosophy, because it's I think it would really benefit from kind of like really deeply exploring this, because that's what philosophy is deeply exploring these questions.
And so I think there's a lot of value in what he actually, like, the objections that he brought up are still valuable, because even somebody like Oppie is going to say something like this, right? Like, we have our theories and objections get thrown at them, and they're very useful to help us explore and build our theories in such a way that we can make them as strong as possible. And so there's this mutual support that you give each other, even though you disagree ideologically or whatever what your fundamental theory is. And so I find his objections to be helpful, because they help shed clarity on what our model actually is and what it's not.
Right.
And so
It's kind of like Rasmussen would say that a lot of times objections kind of shine a light onto our path, and they help reveal things that can even help us polish them.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Travis, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Prophet Azad, for putting out your video. And have a good night, everybody. If you have questions, you can contact us through the comments. My email address is always in the description of the video for everybody. And I've partnered with a ministry called Talk About Doubts. It's a ministry where we just get together with people one-on-one who are sincere seekers or are Christians that are having some doubts. And you can have a safe space to talk with some experts on the area, depending on what your question is. So link will be in the description for that as well. Thank you so much for listening. God bless.
Take care. God bless.